Hello, my name is Dries, and I was having a look at Patri Balanovsky's workflow, and I saw that he works using similar concepts to 3D rendering. And some of these concepts he uses are easier to understand if you know a bit of 3D. So in this video, we're going to have a look at how 3D can help you in 2D. So this video is not software specific, neither is it 3D specific. We're going to use it as a medium to show off some rendering techniques that you can do using 3D software, or you could do those by hands. And if you're into 3D, we'll learn how to use passes to render passes to give you more control on your render. And in 2D, if you're into 2D, pretty much the same thing, but you're going to be doing more of the heavy lifting. This video is based around one of Patri's designs since he inspired me to make this video, and I'll have a link to his work in the description so you can find out more about his work and his workflow. So first, let's talk about rendering. I'm simplifying, but essentially your screen or image is made of pixels. And rendering is simply coming out with the value for each pixel. So keeping it simple again, there are two main big ways to render with multiple variants, and I'm oversimplifying, but just to get my point across. The first one is to solve the value for each pixel and then move on to the next one until the image is made. You're kind of brute forcing your way to making the image. And the second option is to work in passes. The final image being the blend of all those passes, giving you the value of each pixel. So the first one is the standard rendering. When you look at Cinema 4D or 3ds Max or Maya using Mental Ray or the default scanline rendering, it uses the bucket to solve each pixel, then moves to another part of the image, and so on and so on. And the other method is closer to what they do in game engines, where they would render passes, and they can render different passes at different resolutions. So when you set your ambient occlusion at a different settings in your game, that might render this pass at a lower resolution than your screen resolution, and then you mix them all together, and that gives you the final image. And in 2D, in Photoshop, the first method would be you to paint the pixels directly. So you're painting and you're giving your values directly, and you wouldn't alter them too much. It's like your first go, and that would be rendering. Or if you kept working on it, that would be more iterative rendering, but it's the same idea. And then second variant is the combination of layers. So you would work on different layers, and the image would be rendered by mixing the values of all those layers. So we're going to focus on that second method of rendering. The goal is to break each component of the image into layers. The main benefit is that you have more control on each step, and it makes it easier to tackle one problem at a time. So this may be a bit abstract to you now, but it should make some sense by the end. So you may be using layers for different parts of your image, separating the character from the background, having the hair on a layer, the line art on another layer, and so on and so on. So this might be the first thing that comes to mind when thinking about layers. But here we're going to be separating light, shadow, color into layers. Essentially, our foundation is going to be flat color. So basically, we're rendering only color with no lighting information at all. Perfectly even lit render, no shadows, no highlights. So just the color information. Everything that makes the skin, the background, the surface, but just the color. So not even the creases, the bumps, the highlights, nothing, just pure color. And then we're going to render only light, removing color from the equation apart from the color of the light. rendering as if the surface was pure black. And then we're going to render as many lights as we want, like this. And then next, we'll render only shadows. So the same thing, no light information, just shadow information. And every time this is on a separate layer. And finally, we're going to render the ambient occlusion pass. That is likely the most useful part to take away from all of this. The ambient occlusion is rendering where the light can and cannot reach. Even in the brightest environment, if you put your hand on a surface, there is no light that is going to reach under your hand. And there's a slight fall off where your hand makes contact, a shadow where the light can't reach, but it's not a cast shadow. If you look at the corners of the walls in the room you're probably standing in, they are often darker because of this. The light bounces around and it has a hard time reaching inside the corners. And these contact shadows are independent from cast shadows, and they are often overlooked. Okay, so all of this is a lot of information that isn't very easy to visualize. So let's have a look at all those render passes, how to generate them inside of ZBrush for this example, and then how we can manipulate them and how they look and what you need to do to make this work. Now let's go about rendering those passes so you know how to break this down. We're jumping into ZBrush, but you can do this in any 3D software. Even using different renderers for the different passes in those software. As long as you don't touch the camera, so the image, all the passes can be layered on top of each other. The first pass we're going to generate is the color pass, or the flat color pass to be more accurate. In ZBrush, we're going to pick the flat color material, and that is going to allow us to render only the polypaint information from our model. The goal is to have all the real color information from our subject without any shading information. That's why it's flat, as there is no volume information shown through shading. For all the next passes, we're going to turn off all the polypaint and set our material to be pure black and pick a material that is similar glossiness to skin. Ideally, you would break all the elements of your subject into black materials with different glossiness representing the actual glossiness or specular information from that material. The cap wouldn't be glossy, so wouldn't the beard, whereas the eyes would be a lot glossier. But for the purpose of this demo, we'll apply a single material to everything. And remember that we will have the power to tweak those in later in post. So we're ready to render the first light now. Feel free to tint the light. Since the material is black, the only color information that will come from this pass is the color of the light. Here, the material I'm using tends to favor bluer bluer colors, so it has a hard time going for this warm color I was aiming for, but we can change that in post. So we're only rendering a light that doesn't cast a shadow here because we're going to break that into a different pass to have more control since this is our main light. All your light passes should be a pure black image with only the light parts showing the lighting information. Quickly, before switching to another light, we're going to turn on shadows and render that and save that shadow for the main light in a different file. When painting a shadow pass, your layer should be pure white. Darker parts only defining the shadows, so it's the total opposite of a light pass. A light pass is pure black and a shadow pass is pure white. Now we're going to switch to the rim light. The exact same principles applies. We're just going to switch to another material for this one, a material that would show off the rim light effect a lot more. For the following passes, for the following light passes, we're going to bake the shadows in with the light pass. Since our image is pure black, the shadows will give a more accurate representation of the highlight, preventing them to show up where they shouldn't. You could separate all the shadow passes from all the light passes. That gives you more control, but it's a little bit more information that we need to manage. We're only breaking it for the main light. The fill light follows the same logic. It's pretty straightforward. And you can add as many light sources as you need. Here we're adding a bit of light from below to simulate a bounce light from below. I'm going to do an additional light pass. This time I'm lighting the model from the front with a glossy material to give some oiliness to this skin. And in the same vein, we're going to use a very specular material and render a pass to catch a bit of the highlight in the eyes. Finally, the last pass, and like I said before, probably the most important to take away from all of this is the ambient occlusion pass. ZBrush does a good job, but it's not as accurate of an ambient occlusion pass. Like a shadow layer, this should be pure white, painting darker values where the light can't reach. Here, the entire shape is a bit too gray, whereas a more accurate representation should have some spots, some white spots, like on the top of the cap or the chin that isn't really occluded by anything. That should be pure white. I could have tweaked the settings to get a better ambient occlusion pass, but it's fine for my needs now. Here's an image of what you should be aiming for, and whether you're painting or rendering, this is what you should be targeting for. Okay, now let's bring everything into Photoshop and see how we can use this to our advantage. Now inside of Photoshop, I've imported every file and every render pass into a single file. And now we can have a look at it. And I've imported each pass into its own layer. And I took the time to properly name every layer. So the first layer at the bottom is our flat layer, flat color pass. That is the one we're going to be pulling all the color information from, and that we are going to be shading on top. Just above that, we have our main light. So this is our main source of light. Then we have our rim light that will help us break the character from the background. The fill light, just to have some bounce light in. Then I have some skin highlight. This is to give us more oily skin quality. And the highlight for the eye. Above all of the light information, we have our main shadow. So we broke the main light we broke the shadow from the main light into a different render pass, whereas all the rim light, fill light, and all of these have the shadows baked in. And this is so we have better control, and we'll see. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. And finally, our ambient occlusion pass. That is going to be on top of everything. Now, how do we make all these passes work together? So all the light information are black layers, are black images with only the highlight information painted in or rendered in. So since it's a black layer, we're going to use screen. And just like that, we turned on a light and we can see some light information come in. Then we're going to do the same thing for the rim light. Put a screen, and now you can see we have our rim light that we can turn on and off. And you can just see how now we have some control. We can turn on and off lights that we've made, and we can decide if we want to keep them, if we want to change them, if we want to tweak them without having to re-render anything. We can change the color. We can do a lot of things. Our fill light, we're going to turn that on. Our skin highlight, we are going to turn that on as well with the screen, and our highlight. And that's the wrong thing. Here we go. So now we have our highlight, skin highlight, fill light, rim light, and main light. It's very glossy, very shiny. So now we're going to turn on our shadows. So our shadows, it's a white layer with only the dark parts colored in or rendered in. So we're going to use a multiply. And now you can see that we have our shadows. And finally, the same thing for the ambient occlusion. Here we can see we can multiply it. And now we have our final image. But you can see that the cap is very glossy, the beard is very glossy, the skin is very glossy, but we have now total control on everything. So we could, for instance, pick this and our rim light and just change that color. So if we wanted to change the tone of our image, make it a bit more eerie, creepy, we could put in a green light in. We can change the color of our main light using the same principle. If you want to make it a bit more spooky, eerie, you can change everything now. And we can also color our shadows. We can also add masks and mask parts of the image to tone down the intensity. We can for instance, take the skin highlight and tone the opacity, bring the opacity down. So now we can have more control on how much of that highlight we want to show off. So I'm going to switch to this image I took the time to edit a bit. And this is what I'm aiming for with this particular image. So what you can see is that I added a few masks on a lot of lights to tone down the highlights where they shouldn't really be there. Or for the eye highlights, I kept a bit of it in the brow, a bit of it on the lower lid, just to give it a bit more life. I think there's a bit of it on the nose as well. Yeah, just a tiny bit. You can see on the top of the lip. So I can selectively just paint the parts I want to keep and mask off all the parts I didn't want. Let's switch to the ambient occlusion, and you can see that I colored my ambient occlusion just to give it more personality. That's something I can do. So this is something I will do. You can see how the ambient occlusion brings everything together. Again, if we had a more, because since it's pretty gray, it kind of shades everything a bit too much. I would have liked to have the chin to be a bit more open and the top of the cap to be more open, but it works perfectly fine for our purposes. Same thing for the shadow that I tinted a reddish color, since the entire image is pretty much warm colors. I added warm shadows and a warm ambient occlusion, but I could have added just to bring some variation. I could have changed the shadows to be a little bit cooler, and you can do anything you want. Just make it a bit cooler. Yeah, like so. Not digging it as much as this, zooming out way too much. So here, this is something you can do. So this is something you can paint in, as well as above all of this, I painted a few corrections and added a bit of subsurface scattering inside of the ear. That is something we could have rendered as well in a separate pass, and just tweak the eyes a bit to make them pop out a bit more. But now you have full control on every render pass. You can tweak them, edit them to suit your needs, and you can really you could save time because you don't have to re-render as much. You could add as many lights as you wanted and then just tweak them all around. And you can do this by hand. You could paint You could paint the additional layers. There's nothing preventing you from simply adding a layer. Let's see. Let's fill it this with black. My thing was on the other screen. So fill this with black and set it to screen so it does nothing. And now let's add something like a different kind of bluish color here, like so. Now you could go, and I have everything set to its own group, and I mask the entire group. So now I can't even, I can't really even go over my my own. I can overdraw. That's what I mean. Let's make it way more obvious. So now you could paint in additional rim lights if you wanted. Obviously not doing the best job here, but you could see if you wanted, you could do anything you wanted using render passes, either in 2D and in 3D, and that was the entire purpose of this entire demo. So I hope you found this useful. I hope that you learned something. I hope that you improved your skills. If you knew everything, good job. Please do have a look at Patri's work and how he goes about doing some of the things we talked about. This is meant to be a side piece to the kind of things other artists do. And this is going to wrap this up for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.